Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to our live series. I'm Tawana Black and I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Economic Inclusion. And I am thrilled to welcome you all here this afternoon for our Know Your Price event. We are thrilled to be able to bring you this event now to be able to celebrate not only this day and this opportunity for us to dig deeper with three phenomenal leaders from across our community and across our country, but even more importantly, to dig deeper on the many facets of economic equity and equality and what it takes for us to move the needle in our community. And today, to mark Black Women's Equal Pay Day, the day when Black women's pay catches up with that of our peers. What a shame, and yet it is a meaningful opportunity for us today to be able to talk about exactly what it takes to stop the wealth extraction from our people in our communities. And we have just the right people here with us today to do that. I'm thrilled that there are more than 500 of you with us here today for this wonderful opportunity. Next slide, please. We have an opportunity today to be able to talk to you about our work. We are a cross-sector organization committed to equipping organizations with the tools and knowledge and resources to really create an economy that works for everyone. In our communities, we have suffered for far too long. On our next slide, you'll see that we have a real opportunity to dig deeper with solutions that center Black, Indigenous, and people of color and racial equity, are data informed and market responsive. And that takes tools and solutions that really empower our communities with economic development, human capital, and transportation and access. But that requires solutions that are race, place, and income centered, and that really walk across the lines of each one of these solutions. On our next slide, you'll see that we really have solutions and strategies at the center in order to work across and work with the public and private sector leaders who have for far too long not been really anchored with communities in driving these solutions. And so we work to foster shared accountability that allows communities to hold each one of us accountable for really moving the needle and closing wealth gaps, dismantling systemic racism and oppression, and ultimately cultivating place-based regional opportunity. This gives us an opportunity on our next slide to be able to make sure that we are moving the needle forward, and our team brings us this opportunity to work with each one of you. And so I encourage you in the future to be able to meet them. Now I want to welcome the man of the hour. Dr. Andre Perry is not a new person to each one of you. We met him when the center first launched back in 2018 as he joined us, and we're thrilled that he's able to meet with us again. He is a fellow at the Brookings Institution Metropolitan Policy Program and the author of Know Your Price, a man who knows these issues firsthand and has worked with communities across the country in majority Black cities and cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, to not only understand the issues of inequality and to understand racial wealth gaps, but more importantly, to create the solutions right in the hearts of communities, and in particular, Black communities, that will propel the entire economy forward. The last time that he was here, he reminded us of the importance of recognizing greatness, intellect, and brilliance in communities, in Black businesses, in Black schools, and Black people, and reminded us that we must take action now in order to move our entire economy forward. And he's back with us today to do just the same. Please help me welcome now Dr. Andre Perry.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tawana, for having me once again. It's a delight for me to present to you all today. This has been a labor of love for me, writing this book, Know Your Price, and you guys were got a preview of it months ago, about a year ago, and I'm glad to present some of that data again. But clearly, the events around George Floyd and Derek Chauvin really sets a new light on this work. It's become clear that the uprisings across the United States amid a pandemic, that structural racism is eroding the quality of life of individuals. And what this book tries to do is establish an empirical basis and a narrative basis to show why we must dismantle racism while we're building wealth, while we're adding value to the wealth extraction by racism. And so that's what this book is about. But clearly, what has happened over the course of a few months now sheds a new light on my work. So I'm going to reshare some of the data I presented to you a year ago. Let's see here. I'm going to start. As you know, you must Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. But here are majority Black cities all across the United States. Obviously, I also study majority Black neighborhoods, and I will present some data on your neck of the woods. But my story starts at home, like most stories. This is where I grew up, and as the story goes, when I was born, the woman in the upper right-hand corner, Elsie Boyd, made a deal with my maternal grandmother that I would live with Elsie because my mother was poor and she was probably abused. And so that deal was executed, and I went along with my older brother that you see here. I'm the handsome one on the left, but my brother came, and eventually along the way, my younger brother came, and other children moved in. As you can see here, there are a number of them, Black, white, and folks of mixed race moved in. Some stayed for a few weeks, some stayed for months, others stayed for years. I stayed till I graduated from high school. I was not formally adopted, but I do consider her my mother. She was 63 when I was born. She has since passed, but she added so much value to my life. This is my father. He was murdered in a prison outside of Detroit, Jackson Penitentiary. The story was told to me because he was an addict, that he was violent and he hurt people, which he did. But that's part of my story I never told. Prior to researching this book, I never talked about my father because of that narrative. But now I have an opportunity to shift the narrative, and I will certainly make the connection to George Floyd in a little bit. But as most folks know, the research anchor of the book is around housing values. As you can see in this chart, on the x-axis, on that bottom axis, it shows the percent of Black people in a neighborhood, and as it increases in Blackness, the listing price of the home goes down. So homes where the share of the Black population is about less than a percent is about $340,000, and it's half that where the share of the Black population is 50% or greater. And a lot of people will say, of course, that's because of education, that's because of crime. But those are things we can control for. And so that's what I did. I controlled for the absolute price difference. We controlled for the structural characteristics of the home, meaning we looked at homes of similar size, similar rooms, and other facets. And then we controlled for neighborhood amenities, crime, education, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. And what we found pretty much astounds that homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by 23%, about $48,000 per home. And that accumulatively is about $156 billion in lost equity. And this is occurring all across the United States. Wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where devaluation is occurring. Wherever you see a green circle, that's where homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher than those in white neighborhoods. But you can see most of the circles are magenta, indicating that most neighborhoods are losing a value on their homes. Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's a pretty big number, 20%, about 33,000 per home. And this is occurring all across the country. Lynchburg, Virginia, 81%. Rochester, New York, a 65% difference. This is astronomical. Jacksonville, Florida, 47%. And again, there are places where homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher. Nashville, Tennessee, 10%. Wichita Falls, 16%. Boston, 23%. But Boston is no less racist than Lynchburg. Trust me on that one. But 156 billion it's a big number. It would have paid for or financed 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their businesses. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a public four-year college experience. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over. It's more than would have covered all of Hurricane Katrina damage, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. And this is where I will talk about my father. My father was an addict. And in researching this book, and I indicate this when in the chapter about Detroit, because he lived back and forth between Detroit and Pittsburgh, he lived in areas that had significant housing devaluation. I am absolutely certain if he was a white man with a drug problem, he would not have been criminalized. His behaviors would not have been criminalized. He would have had a better education. He would have had equity in a home. He would have had the kind of services you would expect from a quality neighborhood. But that the resources that was required to have that kind of upbringing were robbed because of racism. And so so when we talk about individuals who are jailed and over policed, these folks are just like me. I am no different from a George Floyd, from my father, or anyone else. I certainly I've had I was fortunate enough to have people where shoulders I could stand upon. But let me be clear that George Floyd is no different. My father, I could have ended up like my father. That more than likely, and I don't take this lightly, that if that things could have happened to me, like my friends that I talk about in my book, that I consider myself lucky. Again, and then this leads me to something I say all the time. There's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That we have got to address policy and stop this white supremacist myth that the conditions of Black cities and neighborhoods are a direct result of the people in them. That it's their fault, it's our fault that people are dying, that people don't have homes and businesses. That is not the case. I'm very briefly going to show a clip from a hearing when I was that I testified on Capitol Hill, and on where we talked about appraisal. This is Representative Al Green questioning me and the members of the appraisal community, appraisal lobby, on discrimination in housing.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now. We're getting some consternation, I see.
Yes, and I'm going to just very briefly go over some business report that also helped inform the book. We know that Black people, let me just go to this slide quickly, that Black people represent about 13% of our population, but only 2% of the businesses in America. Only 1% of Black business owners obtain loans in their founding year compared to 7%. And Black entrepreneurs are denied bank loans more than twice as often as their white peers. People of color pay higher interest rates. About half of Black businesses survived the Great Recession compared to 60% of the white-owned firms, and 95% of Black-owned businesses did not receive PPP loans. A lot of this is connected to the lack of equity, the lack of wealth in our communities. And this is something we have to address because, again, it is not about us. We wanted to look at business quality the same way we did housing quality. So we looked at business revenue. We got that from Dun & Bradstreet database. And we also scraped all the Yelp data of businesses across the United States. And then we controlled for neighborhood conditions. So we looked at spending power, we looked at education, we looked at all those other factors. And what we found, again, may surprise. Minority-owned businesses are rated just as high, if not higher, than their white-owned counterparts. And this is not surprising for me, but businesses in Black neighborhoods receive fewer reviews and get less revenue overall. You can see that here in this chart as the percent of the Black population or share of the population increases, the number of Yelp ratings, Yelp reviews decrease, and revenues decrease. And it's costing about Black business or businesses in Black neighborhoods, I should say, upwards of $4 million. And this leads me to another statement before I close. Is something that if you lived in a Black neighborhood, you've heard this before. Our ice is just as cold, that our homes are just as valuable, our businesses are just as good, but they do not get the kinds of investments that their white counterparts get. In addition, wealth is being extracted by racism, further throttling our economic mobility. Just like we know empirically, our elders knew anecdotally that if you avoid quality in Black communities, you distort the market in a way where quality businesses are competing with low quality businesses. And more importantly, people just aren't getting great services because people are avoiding the quality just because it's in a Black neighborhood. That has to change. But nothing grows without investment, that's clear. But we also must stop the wealth extraction that regularly goes on in mundane activities from day to day. So I want to stop there because I want to get into a robust conversation with individuals who are doing this work in your neighborhoods, that are doing the work in the MSP region. There are assets, and first and foremost, when we get to talk about solutions and we talk about investments, we must be clear that we must prioritize investments in people first. Investments in place without people always leads to gentrification. More importantly, people need the resources to grow. When we don't see growth, we should look for the lack of investment. So what I'm doing with this book tour is really trying to pinpoint the individuals and the institutions that deserve the investment. So I'm looking forward to meeting the folks who deserve greater investment, greater attention, and so that we can direct investment towards them to lead to the kind of growth we know MSP deserves. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andre. That was just phenomenal and a great testament to not only the research that you have put forward in partnership with your colleagues and the amazing testament that comes forward in the book. I know that many of our colleagues across the region, but also across the country, have purchased the book. We have been highlighting and sharing the book all over. And so it's wonderful for us to be able to hear more about that book directly from you. And I have to say, because you mentioned the importance of people and investing in people and place, I'm grateful that you also shared your personal story, the story and the experiences that we come from, the people who make us, both the good that they have been through and the not so good that they have been through. We know that that all shapes who we are and how we show up in this work and how we bring that forward in the work that we do every day to build equity, to build wealth with and for our people. And so I appreciate you bringing that realness to your story today, as always. I am excited now to welcome two of my friends and colleagues to this discussion along with you, who are both disruptors, who are change makers and power brokers in their own way, and are also two people who believe deeply in the power of people and investing in people, and the power and purpose of investing in place. And I am thrilled to welcome now to the microphone and the stage Shannon Smith-Jones and D'Angelo Vigibson, who have been leaders in their own right. Shannon is the executive director of Hope Community, Inc., where they are investing in people and place through both infrastructure investments in housing development and ensuring that people have the opportunity to live in safe, affordable, and quality housing, and business development and infrastructure, and ensuring that that is done with a lens of wealth creation and development. And D'Angelo is doing similar work in our community and has always had the notion that by investing in people and investing in the visions that people have for themselves, we can move our economy forward, and that we must do so specifically with a lens of investing in African Americans, and doing so one by one, collectively, will move our economy forward. I am thrilled that the two of these individuals do so in partnership and in solidarity, lead with their values, and are happy to be able to join us today to talk about this very topic of how we go about ensuring that the devaluation of our properties, the devaluation of Black people, the devaluation of our community stops, and that we start to move forward in building wealth in our communities. Welcome both Shannon and D'Angelo.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this afternoon, both of you, and welcome to the conversation. I want to begin by inviting both of you to share a little bit about your own work, the work that's taking place inside your organizations, and how you feel like it fits into this conversation today. Do you want to begin, Shannon?
Sure, I will do that. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you, Andre Perry. I got super excited reading your book. It aligns with so much and gave me words and context to a lot of things that I've been feeling. So I'm an executive director of Hope Community. I've been there for a little over 3 years. Hope Community creates connections that strengthen the power of community members and community. It kind of summarizes it up. We have close to 265 units of housing. We do community building, organizing, leadership development with youth. We have a Best Buy Teen Technology Center. We have 3,000 square feet of community gardens. And we're really looking at expanding what community ownership looks like through owner-occupied land trust models. This work inspires me so much. I grew up in North Minneapolis, had family in South Minneapolis. And one of the things that I would love to dig deeper in today is just around that valuation, because I feel like we need to talk about wealth building and home ownership different with Black folks, because it doesn't mean the same, and we don't get the same things. So I'm super excited to be here. I can't wait to dig deeper into this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. D'Angelo.
Good afternoon, everyone. D'Angelo Vigibson, CEO of NAO Partners. We are 18 months in owning and operating our own business. We are built environment experts, really focused around real estate development, commercial leasing, and urban planning within the neighborhood context. Our focus is Minneapolis and St. Paul proper, focusing in non-central business districts. So that means the neighborhoods and commercial corridors most impacted by COVID-19, most impacted by the civil unrest that happened in the Twin Cities Metro. And our work is really centered around how do we impact small business and how do we help small business owners take that next step, whether it's owning their own kitchen versus leasing, helping nonprofit programs roll out their social enterprise programs, or helping local investment groups go from ideation to actual stakes in the ground. And so our work is really focused in neighborhoods, one, because we saw that the macro economy doesn't serve the micro neighborhoods as efficiently. It sometimes comes off as predatory in the commercial real estate environment. And so we wanted to be that engine in which we can drive sustainable business acumen and change in our community.
Thank you so much. I want to start with a question for all of you. One of the things that we talked about when Andre first raised the notion of this book and the research with me, and he was zeroing in initially on cities that have majority Black populations, and we don't have that, and yet we do have concentrations of African Americans in neighborhoods, and we have had at times concentrations of folks who have been homeowners. And we knew that this topic would be important for us. And we have not had the ability to be able to see a real trajectory of growing wealth in our communities. So we wanted to say, yes, come here, please come here, even though we are not a majority Black city, because we feel like it's important, and that oftentimes decision makers, policymakers, business leaders don't always grab hold of this kind of research because of our demographics in Minneapolis, St. Paul. How does this data resonate with you all?
I can start. I think I'm glad the data is there, right? I think about when I was looking for buying my home, and I would look at homes in South Minneapolis versus North Minneapolis. I'm in North Minneapolis, but I know my home where it is would be valued way more somewhere else. And we talk about home ownership as a wealth building way, and I don't think Black folks use that in the same way. I think about in the book where Andre Perry's talking about this home that they lived in and this community wealth. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is a price to it, right? Like it was a community home that everybody knew they could come to and they stay there. And it's not a starter home that they pull the equity out of and go get another home or make investments in. And so how do we talk about wealth building differently and get the value for what we're actually bringing into community? And so it just resonated on like so many levels. I already know I'm buying this book for folks at my job, so they will be reading.
Good. But you bring up a good point about community wealth, that typically we measure wealth in terms of fungible assets that are explicitly financial in nature, bank accounts, cars, homes, 401k, things like that. But for us, it is clear that people have helped us move beyond when policies were deliberately limiting the wealth building opportunities for Black communities. And so when we talk about wealth, we should also talk about those social structures. And remember, and the reason why I bring up the Moynihan Report, when it was developed, it provided in the 60s, it provided a great sort of structural analysis, but it set a horrible template of blaming Black women's marital choices for poverty, which is a ridiculous notion. But for so long, there's part of the American dream. It sets a narrative that it's the individual's actions that determines your economic outcomes. But the reality is policy is always privileged whiteness so that they can get material gain at the expense of community wealth for Black people. And so there's always this effort to say that something's wrong with us. And what I love about this current moment, people see through that flimsy narrative. We have the data, we have the information, and now we have an opportunity to shift that narrative so that folks can see, no, you didn't get wealth because you were more financially literate. You got wealth because homes, the historical letting of loans to some communities and not others. And that's just one way that white folks got more wealth. But let's be clear that our communities have wealth. And when you have a president of the United States that says, what do you have to lose? You should vote to me. They are completely missing the value in Black communities. And so we got to claim and reclaim again our value in communities.
I think that's an amazing point about how the policy also worked hand in hand with private market discrimination. And I mean, we've seen it in the documentary here in the Twin Cities, the Jim Crow of the North, about how racial covenants were a private market solution for keeping people of color, but particularly African-American families, from their community. And we see that those neighborhoods are roughly 48,000 average home price higher than in the African-American communities right adjacent to them in South Minneapolis and in North Minneapolis. But then I also think about the work that the center's doing and kind of the data that came out of the book. And we're talking really about the true cost of racism in our society and in our community. And I think about this not just from an economic standpoint, but what has that racism's economic impact done to the social fabric of a community? What has it done to the cultural fabric of a community? And I think of just, I'm a St. Paul guy, so I'm going to bring it back home. And I think about the Rondo community in St. Paul, well documented the impact of losing 700 homes and 300 businesses. But the economic toll, and it's hypersensitive about the timing. And so the economic toll was $20 million in 1980. And why is that important? Because in 1980, $20 million of equity, not income, but equity, is enough to pay for every Black child in Ramsey County to go to the University of Minnesota. So this is a time when the value and the economics align with the cost of living that would have propelled the entire county, just one neighborhood, but the entire county, into a different paradigm. And so what did we lose? What did we lose based on those historic policies and historic private market practices that really took the opportunity away from communities to be self-sufficient here in the North?
Yeah, and I just want to be clear that economic justice is completely connected to social justice. It is not coincidence that police stop Black residents at a rate of 2.46 times the proportion of the population compared to police stopping white people at 0.48, about 0.48 at the rate of the population. And then you connect that to the 48% rate of home ownership to 79 roughly of white home ownership, Black to white. These are connected. And there's nothing that says that a Black person doesn't belong in an economy than you having a police officer literally choking them out in broad daylight, choking a Black man out in broad daylight. Nothing says that a Black person doesn't belong in an economy than that. And so we've got to see the connection between social justice and economic justice and really build bridges so that as we're building wealth in Black communities, we're dismantling the social structures that also throttle our prosperity.
That notion of the history that you just gave there, DeAngelos, is one that is often, not often, I think almost constantly hidden, right? And whether that's hidden purposefully, so let's keep these facts from being known so that we can continue to perpetuate the lie that it is a social problem that is almost innate, right? That it's a part of the bloodline, to your point, Andre, or it's one of those things that, do we even know that, right? Do we know these facts that this is what could be if these dollars were there? So how do we go about taking the facts and bringing those facts to bear through both policy change and economic change today in order to both stop the wealth extraction, but then to also get the dollars back into the hands of homeowners, business owners today in order to propel African Americans forward?
I have very specific recommendations in the book, and as well as in general, that one, I would love to see microloans to current homeowners, because know that the housing devaluation limits the amount of discretionary spending that they can put in their home in other areas. So we do need microloans to those folks, or even micro grants to folks in areas where there's devaluation. We also need new mortgage products, quite frankly, where we can see longtime renters becoming homeowners. No question. I'm working with the Ashoka organization, and this fall we're going to announce, I want everybody to pay attention to this, we're going to have a $1 million competition where we're going to incentivize people who are working on housing devaluation, people who are proximate to the problem, not some, not a think tank from far away, but somebody close to the problem. In addition, I really do believe that we need to identify business goals that the nation and regions need to rally behind. I'm working with CAP EQ. We're going to try to increase the percentage of businesses of sole proprietorship, Black owned businesses to add an additional employee, which will add upwards of $55 billion to the economy. So a lot of people, a lot of Fortune 100 companies are putting out money. They need to be, those money needs to be directed, specifically targeted to entrepreneurs and firms in ways that can maximize that investment. And so there are solutions out there that we can work on, but we have to do so together, concretizing them into policy and in practice.
I appreciate that notion around both and, right? So the development side of things, the housing affordability side of things, and access both from a home ownership perspective, ensuring that those homeowners who are already in their homes can continue to draw down financing that helps them stay in those homes and increase wealth, but also the business development side of things. And I know on that side, DeAngelis, you've been working in some arenas that specifically look at how we can help business owners not only be a business owner, but be an employer, grow the amount of employees who are earning family sustaining wages. When you hear what Andre just described and working with CAPEQ to ensure that those business owners are adding to their employee base, how does that resonate? Do you see it as a strategy, particularly in this market?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it has to be one of the leading strategies that we see in this market. I mean, if you look at really the hyper intentionality of historic issues around race and policy, they weren't ambiguous. They named explicitly who was not going to receive land during Homestead Act. They said who's not going to receive loans during the federal home loan era. They said who's not going to be able to rent in these communities or live in a house even if they didn't buy the house. And so I think the hyper intentionality also needs to return around the proportionate reinvestment in areas that had disproportionate disinvestment over time. I think there's also along to that point, there needs to be an equal investment in private sector solutions. And so being in the built environment, most of the revenue is driven as a derivative of fee. So when I hear $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 difference in deltas, if I'm working on a 4% fee, I am disincentivized to even work in my community, to even serve my community with a real solution. And so I need something that's going to propel me, a capital pool that's going to say, hey, we know that the valuations aren't there to generate a strong small business ecosystem around the built environment, but we can get there with volume because capital is going to be there for organizations like Hope, organizations across town that are focusing on small business development in urban circles.
I appreciate that notion, and it's one of the things that we work on the most at the center is if we're going to talk about history, if we're really going to get honest about history and the data that you just elevated throughout this entire presentation, then we've got to acknowledge just how far behind the starting line is, that it's not only about income, which frankly, particularly in this market, but all over the country is the piece that we talk about the most. Frankly, we talk about employment a whole lot and education, which are all important. But given the amount of wealth extraction that has taken place in this country, we've got to talk about that and be serious about it, and then talk about how much more then we have to overemphasize investments in order to ensure that we even get anywhere near the same starting point. And that's going to require significant both public and private sector investment and over-intentionality, overspending, over-commitment in order to just ensure that we're anywhere near the same starting point, and doing so for several years. DeAngelis gave us a perspective about what that might look like in the business development arena. Shannon, what do you think about it as it relates to both the affordability side of things for renters and then moving people into or growing their base when it comes to home ownership?
Oh my, I mean, DeAngelis talked about like incentive. There's no incentive to create affordable housing, right? There's not enough money or willpower to say we want to fund any housing at 30% area median income and lower, right? So now we're watching homelessness, expand everywhere. But the other piece that it makes me think of Ta-Nehisi Coates, for reparations, right? So we're talking about this, and what Andre has explained is this extraction, right? The devaluing of Black bodies, of Black spaces, of Black homes, of Black businesses. And that is all the way up into present, right? So we are constantly, everything that we do is being taken from. right? We're not getting as much. And so what does it look like to have a different loan product that talks about how we engage with dollars differently? If we're unbanked because we live in a cash world, we don't qualify for those things. But I might have paid my $2,000 of rent for 30 years. But because I don't ask for a loan and because I'm not engaging in this white normative system, I can't engage and be able to do some of the things that our counterparts can do. So what does it look like for us to have our own loan pools or do something different or be creative about it and be as specific as you said? You were, D'Angelo's, you're specific around who can't live on a deed. We should be specific about who this is for. And locally, it makes me think about Upper Harbor Terminal, right? Like we know this is like a thing here, like it's such a hot button, but there's an opportunity in a historically Black community to invest back into the community, right? And so what I'm hearing from the book is that we get the leftovers. You have developers that come in and then they're like, oh, we got to meet a quota, right? So we got to give this many dollars to this many, like developers, we got to get, we got to have a couple Black businesses in there so folks don't get upset about it. And so they create a plan and then fit us into the end. They need to start with us. The investment needs to be with us. It needs to be about us. And they need to make the products and stuff work in a way that we can engage in. The whole country is better. Those kids that didn't get educated because of this extraction and Rondo impact our local economy. It impacts our local world. It impacts how great we could be in some of these things because we haven't invested in them. And so I think different products, I think that there needs to be policy that pushes for housing. We should not have encampments everywhere. Housing should be a human right. If we're going to invest in all these other things, we need to invest in our people. We should not have folks living in tents and parks. And we have vacant houses, right? So we could be creative about some stuff, and we just have to have the political willpower to do it. And we just have to organize if they're not going to have the political willpower to get it done.
So that last piece you hit on, the political willpower, the organizing that takes, speaks to the very name of the book, right? Knowing your price, knowing our value, when we know what has been taken from us, when we really understand the value that exists, and to the point of the business data, right? Our valuation is not the question. Our talent is not the question. Our brilliance is not the question. That is not the problem here. Knowing our price, though, some of that can become a question. Our willpower, our willingness, our capacity to band together and demand that valuation, though, does become a bit of a challenge in the politics, in the DNA of our communities. What are we to do there? And Andre, does the book offer something to our viewers, to our panelists, that you would guide us in? And then Shannon and D'Angelo's, I'm coming right back to you in terms of what do you see here? What would you offer up to us in this space?
I love talking about the title of my book because it really gets to the core of what I'm trying to do. My favorite play in the whole wide world is Two Trains Running by the great August Wilson. I'm from Pittsburgh. In the play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh. And the city offers Memphis $15,000, in which Memphis replies, no, I'm not selling my property for $15,000. I got my price. I know my price. I'm paraphrasing, but it's a refrain throughout the play. I got my price. I know my price. I'm not selling. There's another character, Hambone, who paints a fence in exchange for a ham. He paints the fence. He never gets his ham. And he throughout the play, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham. And we're not clear if he had mental illness before he painted the fence, but eventually he goes crazy and actually dies demanding his ham. And I know people are like, that's a sad story, but there's actually a happy ending. The main character, Memphis, gets $35,000. And the moral of the story is know that you have worth. What this book tries to do is to give people the price to stand on, even if it means going crazy and dying. What is an asset in Minneapolis? People have spoken. The streets have now claimed their price. We've got to leverage that as much as possible, because without that demand, there, as others have suggested, there is no incentive for people in power to change. Yes, we're seeing charity right now. We want investment. And that's going to take a demand, and it's going to take a party of the willing. But I think it's there in MSP. I really do. Because when you see what's happening in terms of policing, when you see what's happening in terms of other zoning changes in the area, when you see what's happening in the streets, there is a new appetite, and people know their value, know their price, and when you do, you see people are willing to do whatever it takes to get their value. So I'm encouraged by that. Now we need to continue protesting. I mean, that should not stop. But in addition to that, alongside of it, we should be changing policy at the same time.
I agree so much. You can't see, but my legs are like kicking and running underneath the table because of the excitement of the conversation. And it's something, so I like to draw parallels. And so one of the parallels I like to draw is that the built environment folks are really excited about regenerative development right now and circular economies right now, which have a lot of principles based in environmental science and environmental impacts of our decisions. And the root thesis of it is that it is not sustainable for us to continue to pollute our environment, because there's a threshold that if we cross, we cannot come back without irreparable harm. And so we are now, if we take that same mindset and look at ourselves in a disinvestment, our urban disinvestment mindset, we are nearing the point of no return. Our urban fabrics, our social, political, environmental, economic fabrics are deteriorating because of exclusion. And so this is where it gets back to the earlier point of the true cost of exclusion. What does it really mean, and how does it show up? It shows up in the police interactions with communities of colors. It shows up when small businesses are designing loans at higher disproportionate rates. It shows up when families have to divorce from one another because of financial difficulties that arise because a system did not give them the opportunity that the status quo allows in other neighborhoods. And so when you talk about that, I think we have to understand that our current makeup is not sustainable without investment that reaches in hyper-intentional ways in communities, is particularly with African-American and other diverse populations.
Absolutely. Shannon, reflections? You're on mute, Shannon.
I know, my brain is going all over the place. I think that the intentionality and the investments and what we need to do right now, I think about George Floyd. I think about what happened to the communities of color, right? You got Lake Street, you got University, you got Broadway Avenue. All of these are streets that are cultural corridors in our communities. We know that a lot of these business owners were underinsured or aren't being able to get back what they need in order to make those investments. We know that a lot of them were leasing that space. How do we control who gets back in those spaces? Those were businesses ran by people of color. How do we make sure that this moment in time, we're not losing even more? And so if I'm super hypersensitive to this, and I'm thinking about how long it's taking to just clean up some of the stuff. Like, I know this wouldn't exist in other communities. And so you mentioned something, what I heard in your question was something around some of the infighting, right? I think we have to be honest with one another that we're not always going to agree on everything. And we might not agree on the how, but we need to agree on the why. And then we all need to find our role in the how and do it. Right. And I think we get to this space where it's like, oh, we don't want to do it that way. We want to do it this way. Or why are you calling it this? And why are you doing it this? And then we get so stuck in that narrative because we're hurt. We're hurt. We're afraid. We've been traumatized over and over again. And we're trying to deal with this constant trauma while creating solutions. But we need to agree on the how, on the why, and then we can work on the how together. And I think when I heard your question, it kind of brought up that, like, we can agree on something, and all of a sudden when it gets to the table, we get in an impasse oftentimes around how to get it done. And we just need to figure out what our role is in it and do it and agree to do that so we can collectively make movement. And we need to cross the line. It can't just be a Black folks thing, right? We need to focus on Black folks because that's what we're here for, to talk about. But when we collectively get together with some other folks, then we actually can push some policy and some other things that actually impact communities of color.
Yeah, I appreciate your notion there, Shannon. And I think one of the things that resonates for me is that often things that are labeled as infighting are really just that negotiation that has to occur within communities, that unfortunately there's been so much extraction within our community that we never get the opportunity to get there, to get to that point, and so little wealth and investment that has taken place, particularly within the African American community, and I would say particularly in this market itself. And so my notion within the question was really about how do we invest in those spaces and places that give Black folks enough time to be able to invest in that building, in that community building, and in that conversation that does then produce the what is the why, what is the motivation, what is the path, and then how do multiple opportunities go out for individuals to invest in. One of the things that I wanted to elevate for us too, in addition to it being Black Women's Equal Pay Day, it is also Black Philanthropy Month. And while we know that certainly wealth extraction is significant in our communities, income and wealth are lower in our communities, African Americans give a greater portion of their income and wealth than any other race in the country. And often it is going to be able to sustain things like Black businesses, like Black homes and Black neighborhoods. And so as we think about what other sectors, other communities, business communities, we've talked some about policy, but we have a lot of business leaders who are on this call, who are participating in this webinar, who are wondering what they can and should be doing. We actually have over 500 people participating today, and our breakdown is about a third and a third between government and the private sector, about another third of nonprofit leaders, and about 5% of philanthropic leaders. We have 25% of people who are not from Minneapolis, St. Paul, so we're grateful for all the folks who are participating today. What recommendations would you all give them for actions they should take as their consciousness has been increased through all the recommendations you've given, all the knowledge you've shared today? What action should people go back and take?
Well, I have to say that if you're a company and you're not working with the Center for Economic Inclusion, you're missing something. This is the time for us to join with leaders who are paving a path towards inclusion. I mean, if you can't figure out this is the time to join, to be a part of something bigger, then you're missing the power of this moment. When I was walking in the streets protesting with lots of people, I saw different faces than usual. I saw white faces, I saw Latinos, I saw Asians, I saw people rallying together. Those folks need to be a part of organizations that are built for change. So I will say that folks need to join CEI. In addition, those companies need to do an audit of themselves. You know, we are demanding Black Lives Matter. Are you making Black Lives Matter in your own company? And folks need some metrics and they need some guidance on that. You know, so I don't want to call the companies out, but I will. But there are companies in MSP that if they looked at their roles, they would see the working poor. They would see people who are being discriminated against. They would see the problems themselves. So folks, companies can do a lot of work internally to turn the corner. And so that's why, I think you have to work with organizations like the Center for Economic Inclusion to be a part of change.
I like that. I like that, Dr. Perry, because I think it echoes where I'm going with this, is that no one can replicate my 25, 30 years of history living in my community. No one can come and copy and paste that with a marketing team or a corporate Fortune 100 team. You can't replace the authenticity that I bring in the community and to the table. And so that means that you have to invest in me. You have to invest in people like me in order for us to do some of the work that you can't do. And if you try to do it, you end up doing it the wrong way, and then you lose brand credibility. And so for us, it's really about you need to be comfortable yielding power. And in this term, we mean resources and I mean investment, not just grants. Philanthropy can do program-related investments. It's legal. They can put their philanthropy dollars to work and expect a return, because now during COVID, there's not a lot of people caring to make grant dollar donations to philanthropy, but they will make investments if they know it's a sustainable investment. And so philanthropy and Fortune 500 communities, as well as large net worth individuals, can continue to make investments in people. To your earlier point, this is not a place-based strategy. We can't fix these communities just by making pretty buildings without investing in the people alongside it. And you typically don't have the relationships to vet and challenge and develop those people the same way the people who are born there, who are leaders there, can do. And so I would echo that not only do you invest in leaders, but make sure that you are yielding your information, your power, and your resources to bring about that change.
I'll just double down on representation matters, and not just as window dressing, as this key decision makers. So for these big companies, if you don't have Black folks on your board of directors, if you don't have Black folks in decision-making roles on your leadership team, there is a problem. And when we're talking about community design, if we're not engaging Black architects, like, we need to be on every level and every decision-making thing as it relates to us. And so organizations, as the call for action comes out, do the audit and see, where do you have that leadership? Where are the places that you're like, hey, we're underpaying folks, we don't have representation in leadership. We all have blind spots. You can't do something for community. You have to do something with community, and we need to be at the table. If not, we need to create our own tables, but we need to be there. And so that's, to me, what I would call out for the corporations, is that you have to have representation on your board of directors and in C-suite spaces.
Thank you all. I'm going to give you an opportunity if there's any closing thought you want to offer before we prepare to wrap up.
I just want to say thank you to Tawana Black and the center and the folks at Center for Economic Inclusion. When I met Tawana, maybe just a few years ago, I was blown away. But there are people who who are our mothers or our aunties who look after us. And Tawana is one of those folks. When I talk about the woman who raised me, I see that in Tawana and others who will fill the breach that policy created, that private companies created. And so we need to get Tawana's back because this is about community building. We talk about wealth, but this is about a belief in community, belief in democracy. And Tawana is doing this. So we got to get her back, and we got to get D'Angelo's back and Shannon's back. And so when we're investing in them, not because it's the chic thing to do right now, but this is about community. This is about saving ourselves from ourselves. So, and then there are people leading the way. So I just want to thank you for doing what you do. Continue, be encouraged, because we're admiring you, we believe in you, and we need to invest in you. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. In solidarity. Shannon and D'Angelo, any closing thoughts?
I want to keep the conversation going. This is not, we are so far behind right now. We have had so much disinvestment, and that we are brilliant people and we can figure this out. And we need to take control of the narrative, and we need to redefine some of these things. So I'm super excited. Thank you, Andre Perry, for the love and dedication and time that I know it took for you to write that book, but it's something that the world needs. And so I'm thankful for it. So thank you.
Likewise, I think I'm gonna echo the last sentiment that we really talked about when we talked about, the impacts of COVID on communities of color and how they are near depression level unemployment and 35–40% levels of unemployment in these communities. And I'm thinking about how deep the bench is of talent in those communities that simply need access to resources and investment and trusting the leadership that is there to deploy those resources. And so I'm going to echo exactly what Dr. Perry said, and trusting the leadership on the ground, trusting the leadership in the private sector that is burgeoning. There's a young, talented class of business, entrepreneurial, and nonprofit philanthropy leaders in community that can get the work done alongside typical grant making measures. And so I'm a private sector guy, so let's make the investments.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. These are phenomenal leaders who are getting it done in our communities. Shannon, DeAngelos, Andre, thank you so much. I am grateful for your leadership. I am grateful for your wisdom, your expertise, and your sacrifice that you are making every day, and for your partnership here at the Center for Economic Inclusion. A big thank you to you all. Now, I want to say to you all who joined us today, thank you. I hope that what you have gained today is not only raised your consciousness and your awareness about this work, but is also giving you tools and knowledge that you can go back and take immediately into your organizations. Many of you have asked throughout today if this is available. Yes, it is. It will be available on our YouTube page. So I encourage you to go there, share this information widely. I encourage you to buy the book from a local bookseller and then get that book in the hands of many others, as Shannon said, into her team's hands. That will help us begin to take meaningful action in our communities. We also encourage you to stay tuned and join us for our Powering Inclusion Summit coming up this December. As you all know, we are taking a focus on understanding our history in order to move forward in our future. We started the year focused on wealth, equity, and the economic impact it has on our country, and in particular here in Minnesota. And we're going to move that forward with our speakers coming up here in December, and you don't want to miss it. So if you have not already committed to sponsoring, if you have not already purchased your tickets, please join us and be sure that you do. We need your partnership. We are grateful to be in solidarity with you, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you on social media, in person when we can. And in the meantime, the choice is ours to do what we need to do to close racial wealth gaps and build an economy that works for everyone. I'm Tawana Black, and I'm grateful to be with you. Goodbye.